Okay, so I skipped page 61. The authors, Ambrosino et al., talk about other frameworks. So they mention that these frameworks are often used together and not always viewed mutually exclusive, which is true. Once people are educated and trained and have worked with these different perspectives, certainly in my practice I think about several of them and utilize them based on my education and research and understanding of them when it seems appropriate for a client. So if I think something might be helpful for them, then I will bring that up using one of these perspectives. So they talk about Freud's psychoanalytic theory and how it can be useful. It's certainly it has had an enormous impact on our country for some various reasons. So it's definitely a part of our culture, not to mention part of what a lot of people in the helping professional fields use to work with people. So psychoanalytic theory, Freudian's theory, and then they talk about Erikson's theory as ego psychology, but it looks at the lifespan development of people. And so Erikson did a lot of research, a lot of qualitative research, looking at patterns, interactions, and common themes that children and adults have during stages of their lives, and created his theory from that. And then, so we were able to kind of see, these are some of the typical things that happen during people's periods of their lives, and that can help us see, well, did this happen in your life? Were you able to go through these periods and do these sorts of things, or was something missing because of a crisis or something that happened in your family? So it can be a place to look. But the authors mention that they're more limiting than the system's ecological framework, and they place more emphasis on early life experiences, which is a good criticism. However, early life experiences have shown to be very influential on our later years. And then on page 63, sorry for that jumping around a little bit, they talk about what I mentioned earlier, the constructivist perspective, and that basically that perspective or theory says that people construct, they build their own realities. And so it can be a way to talk about with clients how they go about constructing or shaping their own reality. And so that's very appropriate, depending on what the situation is, to introduce this perspective or way of thinking about things to them, and talking about how it might be helpful for them. And then on page 64, the authors make a statement, which I think is an important one to consider and reflect on and see if you agree with them. It's down near the bottom of the first column, part of the first sentence in that last paragraph. They say that at a minimum we would probably all agree that such a system would guarantee to each person a socially defined minimum standard of well-being. And see, I'm not sure that I agree with that, so it would be interesting to know what you think about that. And then they talk about, at the end of that paragraph and the next one, the social welfare system is most frequently perceived as a residual social system that comes into play when there's a failure in the primary system. And we talked a little bit about some of these social welfare programs in week 2, and so they're talking about systems and how they affect each other here. And so just things for you to ponder. And then on page 65, here's another definition of a definition of the social welfare system as a structured set of responses developed to deal with the dysfunction of other systems. And so their suggestion is that because we've seen in society that people may not be able to meet their basic needs, then someone decided that we needed some kind of response to that. So it's a way of looking at what social welfare, the purpose or the reason for social welfare. And then they talk about how one of the problems of the social welfare system is that each need is treated as a separate issue rather than interactive and independent. And I think someone sort of addressed this in week 2. I can't recall the specifics right now, but I think someone addressed this in week 2 in one of their answers, sort of based on our interdependence, but it would be pretty challenging to develop a social welfare system that could actually respond to all of these interdependencies. It'd be interesting if someone really came up with that. On the top of page 65 in the second column, they mention the federal welfare reform legislation enacted in 1996, and they're talking about the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunities Act that Clinton passed that we talked about in week 2. Now, they make a statement which I wanted to bring to your attention. They say, in reality, most public assistance recipients receive benefits for only a short time, but they often have to move back and forth between welfare and work and cannot make ends meet with the low-paying jobs because of their limited education and training. And so one of the issues that I have with this statement is that they have no references or data to support their answer. And so, reflecting on what I'm asking you to do in the weekly discussion questions, I would say that the authors did not appropriately use support or reference for this statement that they make, that in reality, blah, 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 blah. So it would have been better for them to have cited a reference to support that statement. And that the legislation is failed to address other needs. And again, they don't cite a reference for that. So it's really important. Because that way you can go back to the information that they cite and see if you agree with them. And then under the page 66, under the generalist model, they talk about the central theme of most generalist practice is the systems ecological framework. And so you're getting a little overview of that this week. And that generalist practice says there needs to be congruency or positive fit between the person and their environment. And that social work is helps promote, strengthen, and restore that positive fit. And then they talk about the strengths perspective in the next column. So generalist social work practice is directed towards identifying a system's strengths and using them to modify the environment to help the person-environment fit. The strengths perspective has been kind of a recent phenomenon in social work. When Dennis Salibi wrote his book, it started, people started incorporating that. So it's kind of a recent way of thinking about human beings and supporting them, the strengths perspective. So it's been kind of an ongoing incorporation in social work. Okay, we're going to stop here so I can go on to the next part.